I need you to understand one number before we go any further. $500. That's the cost of building an explosive drone boat. Fiberglass hull, commercial GPS, a motor you could buy at any marine supply store, and enough explosives to punch a hole through reinforced steel. $500. Maybe $1,000 if you want redundant systems. Now compare that to the $2.1 billion price tag on an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. $2 billion, 300 sailors, Aegis combat systems that took decades to perfect. And here's the problem. Nobody at the Pentagon wants to say out loud. In the shallow, narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz, that cost gap doesn't translate into the battlefield advantage you'd expect. Not even close. I'm Kane Shimatsuka, and what I'm about to walk you through isn't just a tactical problem, it's a structural failure in how modern naval power projects force into environments specifically designed to neutralize it. The Strait of Hormuz isn't an ocean. It's a 33-kilometer choke point. That's 21 miles. On a clear morning, you can see Iran's coastline from Oman. Through that corridor flows roughly 20 million barrels of oil every single day. 1/5 of global supply. A fifth of everything that keeps the world economy running moves through a gap narrower than most people's morning commute. And Iran controls the entire northern shore with 2,400 kilometers of coastline, dotted with IRGC naval installations housing the largest inventory of fast attack craft, anti-ship cruise missiles, and naval mines in the Middle East. Let me tell you what asymmetric warfare actually looks like when it's executed correctly. The United States Navy is the most powerful surface fleet in human history. $13 billion aircraft carriers, $40 billion carrier strike groups, technology refined across decades of unchallenged supremacy. But the Strait of Hormuz is not a conventional battlefield. It's what Pentagon analysts quietly call one of the most challenging anti-access environments on the planet. Shallow waters, tight shipping lanes, GPS-vulnerable choke points, and an adversary whose entire naval doctrine was purpose-built for exactly this geography. Iran didn't try to match the U.S. Navy ship for ship. That would be strategic suicide. Instead, they studied the terrain, studied the economics, and built a military strategy around a concept called anti-access area denial, A2AD in the briefing documents, asymmetric nightmare in practice. The IRGC Navy operates hundreds of fast attack craft, small, fast, cheap vessels armed with anti-ship missiles or packed with explosives for suicide drone missions. A swarm of 20 costs less than a single Tomahawk cruise missile. They launch simultaneously from multiple coastal positions. They operate in waters too shallow for large warship maneuvering. And they're designed to overwhelm a defender's ability to track, target, and destroy every incoming threat before one gets through. This isn't theoretical speculation. In 2002, the Pentagon ran a war game called Millennium Challenge. A retired Marine general named Paul Van Riper played an unnamed Middle Eastern adversary, widely understood to represent Iran. Using swarm tactics, fast boats, and anti-ship missiles, Van Riper's forces sank 16 U.S. warships in the opening days, including an aircraft carrier. The exercise was paused and restarted with rules preventing the same tactics. That was 23 years ago. The technology enabling swarm warfare has only gotten cheaper, more autonomous, and more lethal. And here's what should terrify strategic planners even more. Nobody learned the lesson. The war game was dismissed as unrealistic. The tactics were characterized as gaming the system. But Van Riper wasn't gaming anything. He was demonstrating what happens when an adversary refuses to fight the war you designed your systems to win. 23 years later, that doctrine isn't theoretical anymore, it's operational, and it's not confined to Iran's coastline. The IRGC spent 2 decades exporting this exact asymmetric model to proxy forces across the region. Hezbollah in Lebanon now possesses an estimated 150,000 rockets and missiles, the largest non-state arsenal on the planet. The Houthis in Yemen demonstrated their capability by striking Saudi oil infrastructure with drones and cruise missiles in 2019, temporarily cutting 5% of global oil supply. Iraqi militias have launched dozens of drone attacks on U.S. positions using the same cheap, effective systems. This isn't separate conflicts. It's a coordinated doctrine spanning multiple theaters, forcing American defense systems to simultaneously protect assets across the Gulf, the Levant, and the Red Sea corridor. Every front requires interceptors. Every engagement depletes the same finite stockpiles. The math problem doesn't get simpler when you multiply the variables. It gets impossible. Today, Iran manufactures explosive-laden unmanned surface vessels, drone boats that can be pre-programmed or remotely piloted toward targets. Combined with shore-based anti-ship missiles like the Noor and Qadr systems, sea mines Iran possesses by the thousands, and the geographic advantages of the strait itself, the IRGC has engineered a scenario where the cost of defense catastrophically exceeds the cost of attack. One PAC-3 MSE interceptor, the kind used against ballistic missiles, costs $3.9 million per shot. One Iranian Shahed series drone costs an estimated $20,000 to $50,000. The interceptor to threat cost ratio can exceed 100 to 1. A retired U.S. Navy captain speaking at a Brookings Institution panel put it bluntly, the math works against us in sustained engagement. Not because we lack capability, but because sustaining that capability against high-volume, low-cost threats depletes stockpiles faster than we can replenish them. And here's the part that should terrify anyone paying attention to global strategic stability. The United States does not have unlimited interceptor stockpiles. This sounds obvious until you examine the production numbers. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Lockheed Martin's current production capacity for PAC-3 MSE interceptors is approximately 500 units annually. Pentagon contracts aim to increase that to roughly 2,000 per year, but that production rate won't be achieved for several years. If a Gulf conflict consumed interceptors at the rate defense analysts model for a sustained Iranian missile and drone campaign, estimates range widely, but several hundred in the first week alone, the math becomes catastrophically tight. Every interceptor fired in the Middle East is one fewer available for the Korean Peninsula. Every THAAD battery repositioned to the Gulf is one pulled from the Pacific theater, where Taiwan remains the most dangerous flashpoint on the planet. This is the strategic tension no one wants to discuss publicly. The United States military is globally deployed. Its commitments span multiple theaters. Its most advanced defensive systems exist in finite quantities that cannot be in two places simultaneously. Iranian military strategists have openly discussed what they call a war of attrition against American missile defense capacity. The concept is brutally simple. Force the U.S. to expend expensive interceptors against cheap threats until the cost of defense becomes economically and logistically unsustainable. Whether this strategy would succeed in actual conflict is debatable. American military capabilities remain extraordinary. But the cost asymmetry is real, measurable, and strategically consequential. Now let me connect this to the larger picture most analysis completely misses. The Strait of Hormuz isn't a military problem with a military solution. It's a geographic and economic reality that exists regardless of who sits in the White House or who leads Iran's government. 20% of global oil supply passes through a corridor physically narrow enough to be disrupted by a motivated adversary using weapons costing less than a used car. No quantity of aircraft carriers changes that geography. No amount of technological superiority changes that economic equation. And no volume of political rhetoric changes the fact that every barrel of oil that doesn't transit Hormuz raises prices at every gas pump worldwide. And here's the erosion happening beneath the surface that strategic planners are watching with quiet alarm. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, have spent decades hosting American military infrastructure, buying American weapon systems, and aligning their security frameworks with Washington's guarantees. But they're also watching the same mathematics I just walked you through. They see interceptor stockpiles depleting faster than production can replace them. They see American commitments stretched across multiple theaters. They see the cost asymmetry that favors the threat. And they're hedging. Saudi Arabia's diplomatic rapprochement with Iran, brokered by China in 2023, wasn't a betrayal of American partnership. It was a calculated insurance policy taken out by a government that's no longer certain Washington can guarantee what it's been promising for 50 years. When your allies start hedging, when they start building alternative security relationships, when they start pricing in the possibility that American power might not arrive when needed, that's not just a diplomatic shift. That's a structural realignment of regional order. And structural realignments don't reverse easily. The people who understand this most clearly aren't the officials giving press conferences. They're the insurance underwriters at Lloyd's of London who've raised war risk premiums in the Gulf to levels unseen in years. They're the shipping executives quietly rerouting tankers around Africa, adding weeks and billions to delivery costs. They're the energy traders pricing in disruption premiums that reflect real probability, not political talking points, of what happens when this situation escalates beyond rhetorical posturing. And they're the strategic planners in Beijing watching every THAAD battery repositioned to the Gulf, every interceptor expended over the Strait, every carrier strike group committed to Middle Eastern waters, because each one represents capacity not available for the Western Pacific. China isn't just observing this asymmetric model, they're studying it, refining it, preparing to apply identical principles in the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. The lessons Iran is teaching about cost-effective denial of American power projection aren't staying in the Persian Gulf. They're becoming doctrine. $500 for a drone boat, $2 billion for a destroyer, $13 billion for a carrier, trillions in global economic activity dependent on a 33-kilometer strait. Those are the numbers. Not the press conferences, not the diplomatic statements, not the political theater, the numbers. And the numbers tell a story no government official will say on camera. In the Strait of Hormuz, the most expensive military on Earth is strategically constrained by the cheapest weapons its adversary can field. That's not commentary on American weakness. American capability remains globally unmatched. It's reality about what happens when geography, economics, and asymmetric strategy converge in a place the entire world depends on. If you want to understand what happens next, don't watch the politicians, watch the insurance rates, watch the shipping routes, watch the interceptor production schedules. That's where the actual story is being written, not in briefing rooms, in spreadsheets, in cost-benefit calculations that reveal structural vulnerabilities no amount of military spending can fully eliminate. The storm is building, the math doesn't lie, and the world is running out of time to pretend otherwise. I'm Kane Shimatsuka. The future isn't what they're telling you it is. It's what the numbers say it will be. And the numbers in the Strait of Hormuz are screaming a warning almost nobody wants to hear.